What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to ICNV Driver's Edition, and today I got another interesting topic for you. Well, this topic kind of been circulating in the chats and so forth, so I decided to talk about it. And the conversation that has been coming up a lot lately, especially after all this trans filter, or should I say DCT filter conversation with the Corvette C8, is the Corvette C8 an expensive car to own? I guess compared to other Corvettes. So let's talk about it. Okay, before we dive into this conversation, let's get through the formalities. My name is Sho. This is ICNV Driver's Editions. This is a car community for the car enthusiasts that love to drive cars to make you turn your head, and that aren't your everyday people movers. We're also an interactive community, which means if you reach out to me on any one of my social media platforms or in the comments below, I'll do my best to respond. And if the topic you bring up is interesting enough, I will shoot a video on it. So here we are today. The conversation has come up, is the Corvette C8 really an expensive car to own? I think it's because most Corvette owners are now starting to look at the cost of ownership of this car. And honestly, they may be right. So when I look at the Corvette C7, because I own the C7, my cost of ownership for the C7 really wasn't that expensive. I really want to believe over 2.5 years of ownership, and I say 2.5 years, over 2.5 years of ownership, the only thing I did to that car was change the oil, and I thought about replacing the brakes because I did drive it, but I actually didn't do it. But I did price check them, so we can talk about that. Since I've owned the Corvette C8, and we're going into 4 years now, what I've done to the Corvette C8 is I've changed the oil, I replaced the DCT filter, I've had the convertible top fixed, I've priced brakes, I've replaced tires. And surprisingly enough, it seems to be a little expensive to do all these things to the car. So let's have this conversation. When it comes down to oil changes and overall are about the same. I charge this to inflation, but I could be mistaken, you tell me. On the Corvette C7, my oil changes are about $149 to $160. Since I've owned the Corvette C8, my oil changes have been $160 to $180. That's been a $20 increase. So as of right now, compared to my ownership of the C7, the Corvette C8 does cost more to own. When it comes down to brake jobs, because I've actually looked into them for both cars, the work hours, or should I say, the job hours are the same. But what has been real interesting, I've come to realize, is for the Corvette C8, the labor hours for the Corvette C8 have started to range anywhere between $160 to $189. And I just think that's ridiculous. But this is what the Chevy dealerships are charging for labor hours. On the Corvette C7, the labor hours were about $129 an hour. So just in labor costs, the cost has gone up. And I say this to you guys because I've actually called around to several dealerships, and the response that I actually get, which makes me believe this is a C8 thing, is that the C8 labor costs are. I'm like, wow. So the Chevy dealerships are treating this Corvette like a supercar. So the cost to repair it, they're treating it like a supercar. So the C7, which my big homie Swole has a C7, those costs are still being treated like sports cars. Maybe we should let that sink in for a second when we have this conversation about, is the C8 a supercar? Chevy treats it like one. Well, looking at other things, right? So as we keep going forward with this conversation, just to maintain the Corvette C8 requires 3 extra services that aren't there in 150,000 miles worth of services for the two cars between the C7 and the C8. So I guess that's more of what we're talking about, or we really want to focus on when it comes to owning the Corvette C8, is the maintenance costs. So Let's look at that a little bit more closely. When you think about the fact that on the Corvette C8, you now have to do a DCT trans filter replacement more frequently, and you have to do a trans fluid flush more frequently, actually 3 more times, the car or the cost of ownership does start to creep up. The DCT filter replacement, depending on where you go, where you're at in the country, and your dealership, that can cost you anywhere between $500 and $750. The trans fluid flush, again, depending on where you go, where you are in the country, that can cost you anywhere from $750 to $1,000. And I've heard some people even say $1,200, which just to me seems outrageous. But dealerships are getting their money for this car and your ownership. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, the 3 extra costs, so if we're talking about $1,000, that's $3,000 more, plus the 1 extra DCT filter flush. So when you look at it that way, off the back, you're talking about an extra $3,000 to possibly $2,100, or let's just say $2,200 worth of cost of servicing on this car. And you didn't have that same cost, or you can avoid that same cost by owning a Corvette C7. So logically, it is more expensive so far to own a Corvette C8. Let's take a quick break and do me a favor. Go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Help me reach my goal of 2,500 subscribers. We're chasing the movement. Be part of it. Join the channel, especially if you like the content you've seen so far. We have more stuff like this coming your way, and you too can help guide the focus of the content that comes your way. So subscribe to the channel, hit that like button. But I guess the question that everybody's really asking themselves, is it worth owning or paying the more money to own a Corvette C8? And in my opinion, I think it is. I mean, for me, the mid-engine Corvette C8 is definitely a different look, a different style, and a different performance animal. And when you get more performance, just like when people go out and add pro chargers, superchargers, and all these stage 1, stage 2 kits to the Corvette C7 to get more performance out, which is probably a smaller percent of the C7 community. But the people that do it also understand the increase of performance requires more maintenance and a higher maintenance cost. And I feel like what has actually taken place is, since you got the Corvette C8, you've gotten a lot more performance out of the Corvette. And with that performance comes a little more cost. I almost feel like I'm saying Spider-Man right now. Like with great performance comes more expensive costs. Whatever. But my point is that as the car performs better, the more cost you can expect to come with the car. So when we upgrade from the C8 base model to the C8 E-Ray, more performance, a little bit more cost with the car. When you go to the C8 Z06, more performance, a little bit more performance with the car. But overall, the real question we're trying to ask ourselves, is it worth buying a Corvette C8, and does the cost really justify it? Is everybody's favorite question. When it comes down to doing the basic things, how much are those going to cost you? Well, I did a couple quick phone calls, and this is the information I have. When you look at replacing an engine alternator, the alternator on the C8 is going to cost you almost $400. It's the labor hours. It's the inconvenience to work on the car. When you look at it for the C7, I've had a friend replace the alternator on the C7. It was under $200, a little bit more cost. When you talk about replacing the AC unit, yeah, it's going to cost you more. When you talk about changing the air filter, it's going to cost you more. Why? Because on the C8, it's not as easily accessible. So you're probably going to end up paying like an hour worth of maintenance costs, whereas with the C7, you usually can do that yourself, or you can toss that in with a quick oil change, and it doesn't cost that much because it's easily accessible. So it's a second nature thought, maybe takes about 2 or 3 minutes. On the C8, not the same. When you get down to the transmission, here we go. This is where you start to realize owning a C8 can be a hefty task. To replace the DCT transmission, or let's take a step back. If you have a transmission issue on a C7 transmission, right? To replace the automatic transmission is somewhere between $4,000 and $7,000. That is like a nice little penny, but you can get it done. And I would say that's more reasonable along with the lines of transmission costs throughout the history of most cars, Cadillacs, everything else on the book. So when I look at it, I'm like, man, you know, I really want to pay $7,000 for a transmission, but because that's historically what transmissions cost, somewhere between $7,000 to rebuild one, somewhere around $4,000, that is what we kind of go to know as the norm. But with this DCT, I called around to a couple dealerships, and what I've heard is you're talking anywhere between $13,000 and $20,000. And some people out there have even said in the comments below and on Facebook chats that replacing the transmission has cost them $24,000. Now, that part, that's absurd. That right there would tell me that I would not plan to own a Corvette C8 without some form of extended warranty. So if you buy one and you have one, you may want to go out and get an extended warranty. I'm not telling you that the transmission is going to fail, but what I will sit there and say to you is this. I've owned a lot of cars in my lifespan, and especially when you buy something used, you don't always know what you're getting your hands into. I've only had one car have a slight transmission issue, and that was my Range Rover. And the minute it had the issue, it wasn't an expensive fix, but my warranty company said, just replace the transmission. We're not going down the road to rebuild it and so forth and yada, yada, yada. And once I got the new transmission, the car drove like a completely different vehicle. I didn't come out of pocket for that. And that transmission cost, just so we can be on the same page, that transmission was about $6,000. When we're talking about a DCT transmission that now is being told, and I can look up and you can do the same research I did, that is now drifting into the 5-digit range, yeah, you might want to think about on an extended warranty. Now, I don't believe we're going to see a lot of engine or transmission failures down the line. GM has reeled that in a lot, although I know people are going to say, I saw one other day, and that it happens. But when we're looking at the cost of ownership right now, that is a big enough swing to make you say, or make you have second thoughts about owning a Corvette C8. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, because we keep it honest over here. I love my Corvette C8, but I do from time to time think about going back and getting a C7 Z06. I'm probably going to upgrade at some point to a more high-performing Corvette C8, but I just haven't decided which one as of yet. Plus, there's some other things I want to do with another car in my future, so it's probably going to be at least a minute. But I guess for the purpose of this video, and not surprising to many, owning the Corvette C8 is a lot more expensive. And until I actually did the research, I didn't realize how much expensive. So, yeah, if you want to pay to play, get you a Corvette C8. If you're looking for a car that's going to have some nice performance and still hang in the mix with everything else, you might want to look back at some Corvette C7s. They aren't bad cars. Don't get me wrong, the Corvette C7 does have its own little issues, and they're not 100% completely perfect cars, but I didn't really experience any during my ownership, so I didn't really get to come out of pocket a lot for my ownership costs. But at the end of the day, when you look at the numbers, when you compare the jobs and you compare the labor costs, C7 is a much more affordable car. But that's all I got for you. So, ICNV Driver Edition. Go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, join the ICNV Driver Edition community. We are an interactive community, which means if you hit me up in the comments below or on any one of my social media platforms, I will do my best to respond. And if the topic you bring up, just like this one, is interesting enough, I will shoot a video on it. But don't forget, we're also a community for car enthusiasts that love to drive cars to make you turn your head, that aren't your everyday people movers. So, don't ever forget that we were designed in His image and given dominion over the world, which means we weren't just meant to be. So chase your dreams, build your visions, never ever give up, and embrace your own identity. It is okay to be unique. He's not done with you, and he's definitely not done with me. So stay safe, stay blessed, and I'll see you in these streets. Peace.